The Adventure of the Westminster Treaty. Chapter 1. The Masquerade Ball. The evening had settled over London like a gentle but impenetrable shroud, muffling the clatter of hansom cabs and the distant calls of street vendors as they packed away their wares. The French embassy, standing resolute and stately on Grosvenor Square, had thrown open its gates for a masquerade ball of unparalleled extravagance. Within its walls, the cream of society gathered under the glow of gas-lit chandeliers, their faces concealed behind lavishly adorned masks, their conversations a whisper above the soft strains of a string quartet. Detective Jane Parsons navigated the throng with an air of detached amusement, her own mask an austere contrast to the plumed and jeweled creations fluttering around her. Jane's guise, a simple domino mask, afforded her anonymity whilst granting her the freedom to observe uninterrupted. Such occasions, despite their ostensible frivolity, often proved fertile ground for the gathering of insights, particularly when the tensions of international politics simmered just beneath the surface. The Treaty of Westminster, due to be signed at the stroke of midnight in the embassy's Grand Hall, promised to be a cornerstone of lasting peace between England and France. Its disappearance could plunge the continent back into the dark depths of conflict, and as Jane mingled, her senses were attuned to any undercurrent of duplicity. As the evening progressed, the guests indulged in the revelry with a fervour that only masked anonymity could provide. Jane noted the prominent figures: the French envoy, Monsieur Durand, a tall gentleman cloaked in sapphire silks, his conversation as fluid as the wine in his glass; Countess Warrington, draped in velvets and lace, her mask an intricate lattice of silver that did little to hide her sharp, assessing eyes; and Mr. Cyril Ashford, the industrial magnate, whose mask of polished brass seemed a fitting tribute to his empire of steam and steel. At the fringes of the ball, hidden behind a curtain of discretion and the sweep of gaudy costumes, Jane spotted the lesser-known but equally intriguing participants. Snippets of overheard conversations hinted at unrest, secret dealings, and the quiet exchange of information. Her keen ears discerned unease about the treaty, a whispered rumour of a clause that might not be as conciliatory as the public were led to believe. The clock neared midnight, and the assembly's attention gradually shifted toward the Grand Hall. The Master of Ceremonies, a portly gentleman with a booming voice, called for the guests to witness the historic signing. It was then, amidst the shifting crowd, that Jane felt the first stir of something amiss. A quick glance at the dais confirmed her suspicion. The ceremonial case, which had earlier been displayed prominently, was subtly yet undeniably altered. With her attention sharpened, Jane manoeuvred through the crowd, her gaze cutting through the sea of masks. She approached the case, now under the guard of several officers, and met the eyes of the ambassador. A brief exchange confirmed her fears. The treaty, the very document vital to peace, had vanished, replaced with a facsimile so convincing that it might have fooled any less discerning eye. The realization struck the room like a bell toll in the silence of night, and chaos unfurled swiftly as the ambassador called for calm. Jane, however, remained a bastion of composure. Her mind raced, piecing together the evening's observations, the veiled threats, the covert glances. With the embassy now sealed and the guests confined, Jane commenced her investigation under the most peculiar and challenging of circumstances. Each suspect presented a complex puzzle, woven of ambition and deceit. The French envoy, suave and guarded, seemed to float above the fray, untouchable. The Countess, with her radical sympathies and disdain for industrial magnates, could very well desire to see the treaty fail. Mr. Ashford, whose fortunes depended on stability, appeared the least likely, though in the world of espionage, the obvious was often a veneer for the truth. As dawn threatened to break, spilling light onto the secrets of the night, Jane Parsons stood ready, her mind a whirl of possibilities. The game of espionage had begun, the stakes no less than the peace of Europe, and she, its unassuming arbiter, found herself poised to plunge into its depths. Unmasking the thief would require all her cunning, for in the world of masks and shadows, nothing was as it seemed, and every face, every whispered word, might hold the key to the continent's fate. Chapter 2: A Gathering of Suspects. As the crimson streaks of dawn crept through the smog-choked sky over London, the city awakened to whispers of deceit and rumours of unrest. Inside the solemn, oak-panelled office of Detective Jane Parsons, the air was thick with the musty aroma of old books and the lingering fragrance of burnt tobacco. The walls, lined with shelves brimming with legal tomes and odd curiosities collected from her adventures, bore silent witness to her meticulous methods and unyielding determination. Upon her desk, a multitude of documents lay scattered, a visible testament to the chaos of the previous night. The Treaty of Westminster, meant to bridge nations with the seal of peace, had vanished under her watch at the grand masquerade ball held at the French embassy. Now, the precious document was replaced by an artful forgery, a fact unbeknownst to all but a select few. With a steely glint in her grey eyes, Jane began the methodical process of examining her list of suspects. Each name on her list belonged to the upper echelons of society, each with their own secrets shrouded in layers of refinement and deception. First on her roster was the French envoy, Monsieur Claude Duval. His charming demeanour and eloquent speeches had won him many admirers, but Jane knew better than to be swayed by superficial charm. She recalled last night, his silver mask catching the light as he conversed in hushed tones with various diplomats, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that belied his calm exterior. Later that morning, as the fog hung low like a mourning veil across the city, Jane visited the envoy in his temporary residence, a lavish suite overlooking the Thames. Monsieur Duval welcomed her with a courteous bow, his expression unreadable. "Mademoiselle Parsons, to what do I owe the pleasure of this early intrusion?" His voice was smooth, like velvet, yet Jane detected a trace of caution. "Monsieur Duval," Jane began, her tone even, "you are aware of the unfortunate disappearance of the treaty last evening." "A most distressing occurrence," he replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Indeed," Jane continued, pinning him with a steady gaze. "I am here to inquire about your movements and discussions during the event." Though momentarily taken aback, Duval recouped his composure swiftly. "I am at your disposal, mademoiselle, yet I assure you, my interests lie in the success of this treaty." Their conversation weaved through meticulous details and subtle probes, but yielded nothing concrete. Duval was a master of evasion, his words leaving no trace of his true intentions. Jane left with a polite thank you, her mind buzzing with unanswered questions. The next suspect was the enigmatic Countess Amelia Wexley, a reclusive figure in London's aristocratic circles. Known for her sharp intellect and disdain for the frivolities of high society, the Countess was rumoured to fund several radical groups secretly, although proving such allegations was a different matter altogether. Jane approached Wexley Manor, its Gothic spires casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The Countess received her in a dimly lit drawing room, the heavy curtains drawn despite the morning light. "Detective Parsons," the Countess began, her voice a cold echo in the vast room, "this visit is unexpected." "Countess, the matter I bring before you is most urgent," Jane replied, accepting the seat offered. "It involves the stolen treaty at the embassy ball." "I seldom leave my estate, detective. What could I possibly know of your treaty?" the Countess inquired, her eyes narrowing slightly. Jane observed her closely. "Perhaps nothing directly. However, your connections might provide insights others cannot." The Countess remained silent for a moment, her fingers drumming on the armrest. "I will tell you this. Chaos often serves to open doors that in peacetime would remain closed." Thanking the Countess for her cryptic yet intriguing input, Jane left with more questions than answers. Throughout the day, Jane interviewed other guests from the ball, piecing together a mosaic of alibis and motives. Each conversation, each subtle shift in demeanor, added depth to her understanding of the intricate web spun around the treaty. As night descended once more upon the city, Jane sat in her office, the soft glow of the gas lamp casting long shadows. Her mind raced through the day's discoveries, each suspect painting a complex picture of political intrigue and personal gain. In this web of half-truths and veiled intentions, Jane knew her journey to uncover the truth had only just begun. With every suspect cloaked in layers of deceit, her path was fraught with danger, yet it was a path she was determined to tread. For in the shadows of international intrigue, it was not just the fate of a treaty at stake, but the delicate balance of peace across the continent. Chapter 3. The Forged Document. In the dim light of her modest study, where the walls were lined with volumes of criminal law and the occasional literary classic, Jane sat with furrowed brow. Before her lay the pilfered treaty, distinctly less regal under the close scrutiny of her magnifying glass. The chandelier overhead cast intermittent shadows as the fog outside battled the beams of moonlight, a fitting ambience for a detective's late-night labor. Beside her, sprawled on a cluttered array of notes and cryptographic charts, was Mr. Cedric Hawthorne, the cryptographer whose talents had seen better days, tarnished by scandals of forgery. Yet his expertise was invaluable, especially now as they pored over the counterfeit document. His fingers, sallow and thin, trembled slightly as they pointed out the subtle discrepancies only a trained eye would discern. "It's masterfully done, I must admit," Cedric murmured, his voice a reflection of defeat and admiration. "See here, detective, the seal. It's nearly indistinguishable from the genuine, but the ink, they've used a modern synthetic blend. Not something you'd find in an official government document of this period." Jane leaned closer, her eyes tracing the intricacies he pointed out. "And the text?" she inquired, her tone both curious and demanding. "Ah, there lies the true artistry," Cedric confessed, adjusting his glasses. "The forger was clever enough to mimic the style of the era, but the choice of words, there's a modernity to them, a structure that betrays a contemporary hand." Jane sat back, her mind racing. The implications of this discovery were profound. If the treaty was a forgive, was the original stolen, or worse, altered? Who would dare such a brazen act, and to what end? Her thoughts were interrupted by Cedric's hesitant voice. "There's more, Detective Parsons." He hesitated, a nervous energy edging his words. I suspect that the original treaty might contain a clause, something hidden, a secret codicil perhaps, intended to serve an agenda far removed from peace. Jane's eyes narrowed. "You believe, or you know, Mr. Hawthorne?" Cedric met her gaze, the flicker of fear evident. "I know," he corrected, his confidence returning. "But proving it, the genuine document must be found." Jane pondered this revelation. A secret clause capable of igniting war rather than fostering peace was a weapon in itself. She needed that original document, but first they had to trace the steps of this nefarious forgery. "Can you replicate this forgery, Mr. Hawthorne?" Jane asked, a plan forming in her mind. "I can do one better. I can point you to who made it," Cedric replied, his eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and redemption. The following day found them navigating the soot-laden streets of London towards a less reputable part of the city, where cobblers and coopers mingled with cut-pursers and charlatans. Cedric led her to a dingy establishment, the kind of place respectable folk avoided. Within, amidst the haze of tobacco and the stench of gin, they confronted Mr. Algernon Smythe, a forger whose skill was the open secret of the underworld. Smythe, a gaunt figure with slippery eyes, regarded them with a blend of amusement and caution. "Mr. Smythe," Jane began, her voice steady, Your talents have garnered quite the reputation. It appears they've also implicated you in a matter of national security." Smythe chuckled, unthreatened. "My dear lady, I am but a humble artist. The canvas I choose might differ from societal preferences, but artistry is, in essence, a reflection of life." "Then reflect on this," Jane countered sharply, sliding a photograph of the forged treaty across the table. "Is this your handiwork?" Smythe's eyes flickered. "Perhaps. But why should I confess to fantasies of detectives and disgraced cryptographers?" "Because," Jane leaned forward, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, "the person who hired you is preparing to sacrifice you should things turn awry. We offer protection, Smythe. In return, we ask for the name of your employer." A silence ensued, filled only by the distant sounds of carriages and the closer intermittent coughs of drunks. Smythe's eyes darted between Cedric and Jane, weighing his options against the backdrop of his precarious profession. Finally, he sighed, a man resigned to his fate, yet anxious to barter. "It was no Englishman who sought this forgery," he began, settling back into his shroud of secrecy as he prepared to weave his part in the intricate tapestry of deception that had enveloped not just a treaty, but the fate of Europe itself. Detective Jane Parsons listened intently, her mind already racing through the implications of his words. Each syllable Smythe uttered carved deeper into the conspiracy, revealing a network of deceit that extended beyond the foggy shores of Britain. Her mission was clear, yet daunting. She must navigate these treacherous waters, where every ally could be an enemy, and the truth was hidden in shadows as dense as the London fog enveloping the city. Chapter 4. Underneath the Surface. Back in her study, Jane sat across from the cryptographer, Edgar Linton. The flicker of the gaslight lent a secretive air to their clandestine meeting, reflecting faintly off Linton's spectacles as he spread out the array of cryptic notes and ciphered messages that sprawled like a spider's web across the mahogany desk. "The network is deeper and far more extensive than we anticipated, Detective Parsons," Linton remarked, his fingers tracing the lines connecting various symbols and cryptic annotations on the parchment. His voice was hushed, as though the walls themselves might be eavesdropping. Each of these messages was intercepted between known anarchist cells across Europe, and if my decoding holds, they point to a convergence here, in London. Jane leaned forward, her fierce, intelligent eyes scanning the documents with meticulous care. "And the treaty's disappearance," she interjected, her tone sharp with curiosity. "Does it tie into this web?" "Precisely," answered Linton, tapping on a particularly inscrutable cipher. "See here, this repeated symbol. I believe it represents the treaty. It appears linked to several key nodes, which suggest that it was not merely stolen for its political value, but as a lever in a larger machination," Jane concluded, her mind racing as the pieces of this perilous puzzle began to coalesce into a sinister whole. The night wore on as they delved deeper into the labyrinthine network of espionage that had ensnared the missing Treaty of Westminster. With each document deciphered and connection unearthed, Jane felt the weight of Europe's fragile peace pressing down upon her shoulders. Driven by the urgency of their task, Jane made the decision to venture into the underbelly of London's espionage network. Armed with Linton's findings, she ventured out into the cobblestone streets under the cloak of night, making her way to a known haunt of spies and informants. The pub, known as the Gaslight, nestled in a foggy back alley of Whitechapel, was dimly lit and thick with tobacco smoke. Patrons, draped in the shadows of their nefarious business, turned watchful eyes on her as she entered. Jane's reputation, though cloaked in discretion, often preceded her, and the air thickened with whispered speculations. Ignoring their stares, she approached the bar, her keen gaze settling on a hunched figure at the far end, the informant known simply as Crowley. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met hers as she approached. "Detective Parsons," he greeted, his voice a raspy whisper. To what do I owe this dubious pleasure? Jane slid into the seat opposite him, her expression unreadable. Information, she stated plainly, sliding a small pouch across the table. The clink of coins was muffled by the din of raucous laughter and the clattering of ale mugs. Crowley's eyes flickered greedily to the pouch, then back to Jane's unwavering gaze. What sort of information might be worth that pretty price? The Treaty of Westminster, Jane replied, her voice steady. And the network that surrounds it. For a moment, Crowley's eyes narrowed, assessing the gravity of the request, before a slow, sly smile crept over his face. A dangerous game you're playing, detective, but it so happens I know a few whispers that might interest you. What followed was a tale woven through the shadows of London's undercurrents. Crowley spoke of meetings shrouded in secrecy, of code words exchanged beneath the echo of Big Ben, and of a gathering storm that aimed not only to shake the foundations of empires, but to redraw the very map of Europe. As Jane absorbed the information, the pieces aligned with frightful clarity. The treaty's theft was but the eye of a burgeoning storm, orchestrated by a mastermind whose reach extended into the darkest corners of political power. Thanking Crowley, Jane left the gaslight with a mind heavy with thoughts, the fog outside a mere wraith compared to the mists that clouded her mission. As the chill of the London night seeped into her bones, Detective Parsons felt the isolation of her quest. Yet, fortified by the knowledge gained, she was determined to trace this web of deceit to its malignant core. Her return to the sanctum of her study brought no solace. The stakes were clearer now and higher than she had imagined. With a resolute breath, Jane Parsons prepared for the arduous task ahead, to prevent a war that could consume the continent in flames. As dawn crept over the horizon, tinting the world in hues of grey and gold, Jane knew there was no turning back. The shadows of deception had deepened, and within them she would find her truth or meet her peril. Chapter 5. The Secret Clause. It was a chilly evening when Jane found herself once again under the shadowy streets leading to the British Library. The gas lamps cast a ghostly glow, the fog twining through the beams like spectral fingers. Detective Parsons, her senses alert to every sound beyond the hush of her own footsteps, was not there for the tranquility of scholarly pursuit, but rather on a mission that could potentially alter the political landscape of Europe. Arriving at the library, she was met by her contact, a gaunt figure known simply as Mr. Thorne. He was an archivist out of necessity, a conspirator by choice, a man whose loyalty could be steered by curiosity as much as coin. He greeted her with a curt nod, his eyes quickly scanning the vacant street before ushering her inside. "The document you seek," Thorne whispered, leading her through the labyrinthine stacks of aged manuscripts and dusty leather tomes, has proven quite the elusive creature. "Are you certain of the game you're playing, detective? The ramifications are—" "Quite clear to me, Mr. Thorne," Jane interjected, with an authority that stopped further inquiries. "The treaty itself. You have it?" After a tense moment, Thorne nodded gravely and unlocked a nondescript drawer camouflaged among many. He withdrew a sheaf of papers, aged yet meticulously preserved. "This is it. The original Treaty of Westminster, complete with the clause no one speaks of." Jane took the document gently, her fingers tracing the faded ink. Here it was, the cause of so much turmoil, capable of igniting a war, hidden in plain sight yet cloaked in secrecy. With a deep breath, she began to read, deciphering the ornate script, every word etched with the potential of disaster. The secret clause, an agreement to partition certain industrial territories between nations, was a veritable time bomb. Why would anyone want this buried? Jane pondered aloud, though she knew the answer. Greed and power, the age-old motivators that churn the underbelly of human endeavours. "Knowledge, Detective Parsons, is both the lock and the key in our world," Thorne remarked. "Whoever controls this," he gestured to the paper, controls the balance. As Jane absorbed the gravity of the document, her mind raced with plans. This was evidence of a betrayal so profound that it tainted every diplomatic parley, every handshake. To expose this was to risk open conflict. To hide it was to become complicit in a silent war against the populace who remained ignorant of the machinations of their leaders. The pair heard a sudden noise, a faint rustling beyond the safety of the archive room. With a shared look of alarm, Thorne swiftly returned the treaty to its hiding place. "You must go now," he insisted, a tense urgency in his voice. "They know someone is here." "But the document," Jane began to protest, "is safer here than with you. Go," Thorne urged, and not a moment too soon. Heavy footsteps heralded the arrival of library guards, likely tipped off by someone watching the street. Jane, with a last nod to Thorne, slipped into the shadowy recesses of the library, her mind working as nimbly as her feet. She needed a plan, allies, and most of all, she needed to think several moves ahead of whoever orchestrated this grand deception. Navigating her escape through a service door rarely used, Jane found herself back in the fog-laden street, the chill of the night seeping through her clothes. She knew she was being watched, perhaps even followed, but the weight of her discovery urged her forward. Under the cloak of London's fog, she melded into the night, the secret claws burning a hole in her conscience. Jane pondered her next steps carefully, for each one carried weight far beyond her own life. Her path ahead was fraught with peril, yet driven by an undeniable moral imperative, she was resolved to tread it, come what may. The game of espionage she had entered was labyrinthine and deadly. With the secret of the claws tucked in the back of her mind, she walked onward, her resolve as firm as the cobblestones under her feet. Chapter 6. The Mastermind Revealed. Jane Parsons stood outside the wrought-iron gates leading to the stately residence of Sir Reginald Hargreaves, the much-revered diplomat who, until recently, had appeared a paragon of peaceful intentions. It was the merest slip during a tedious review of diplomatic correspondences that had alerted Jane to the possibility of Sir Reginald's involvement. A brief mention in a hastily deleted dispatch noting Sir Reginald's unscheduled visit to an industrial armament factory not known for its touristic appeal. A spark had flitted through Jane's keen mind, illuminating a trail obscured by diplomatic niceties and highbrow deceit. As she approached the grand house, her thoughts turned involuntarily to the events that had led her to this juncture. The missing treaty, the night of masquerades, the visages of society perched behind gilded masks, and the heavy cloak of conspiracy that draped the upper echelons of European power. Each layer peeled away had only revealed another, denser and darker than the last. Her footsteps echoed hollowly as she ascended the stone steps to the diplomat's door. The house loomed large and imposing, a sentinel guarding secrets too perilous to be set free. With a steady hand, she knocked on the door. The door swung open silently, revealing Sir Reginald, attired not in the silks and finery suitable for an evening of leisure, but in a simple robe, suggesting he had been pulled away from his private reflections, or perhaps calculations. His face, usually the mask of genial diplomacy, bore a look of wary surprise. "Detective Parsons," he greeted, his voice smooth as the silk. "To what do I owe the honour at this late hour?" "Truth-seeking, Sir Reginald did," Jane replied, stepping into the foyer, her eyes swiftly scanning the opulent surroundings, about a matter of utmost urgency and delicacy. "Then by all means, let us discuss it in my study," he offered, leading her through the corridors filled with the heavy scent of mahogany and old books. Once seated in the richly adorned study, Jane wasted no time. "Sir Reginald, it has come to my attention that your involvement with the Treaty of Westminster may not have been as straightforward as it appeared, and that perhaps your interests align more closely with the destabilization of Europe than with its peace." Sir Reginald steepled his fingers, regarding her with an unflinching gaze. "Those are serious accusations, Detective. What evidence do you present?" Jane reached into her bag, pulling forth the copies of the dispatch and several other incriminating documents. There is enough circumstantial evidence to warrant a thorough investigation. Your secret visits to the armament factories, the curious influx of funds to certain anarchist cells, and a rather damning paper trail. For a moment, the diplomat's composed facade faltered, revealing a flicker of concern. You are a formidable investigator, Miss Parsons. I admit I underestimated your capacity for unravelling such a complex web. Why, Sir Reginald? Jane implored, not just as a detective, but as a citizen of a continent teetering on the edge. Why risk a war? Sir Reginald rose, walking slowly towards the window, staring out into the fog. Because, detective, the current peace is but an illusion. The industrial magnates, the so-called captains of progress, they exploit and discard the common man. My methods may be drastic, but sometimes to achieve true equilibrium, one must first unbalance the scale. Jane listened, the weight of his words not lost on her. And the cost, the lives lost? Collateral in a much-needed revolution, he said, almost a whisper lost in the grandeur of the room. I cannot let that happen, Sir Reginald. I must protect those lives, even if it means exposing your machinations. He turned to face her, resignation etched into the lines of his aging face. Then do what you must, Detective Parsons. I, too, am but a player on this grand chessboard. We all make our moves and live with the consequences. Exiting the residence, Jane's mind churned, not just with the urgent need to act, but with the piercing realization of the enormity of the shadows she fought against. Each step away from Sir Reginald's house was a step deeper into a battle that was as much moral as it was political. Chapter 7. The Web of Deceit. Jane Parsons wrapped her dark cloak tighter about her slender form. Her mind, ever a cauldron of thoughts, simmered with the latest disclosures and the weighty implications they bore. The hour had grown late, too late for any innocent undertaking. She had agreed upon this covert rendezvous in an abandoned warehouse near the docks, a place where the tide of humanity ebbed to reveal the dark underbelly of London's grand facade. Her companion in this furtive meeting was none other than Sir Reginald Ashcombe, a gentleman of notable repute and a high-ranking member of the Foreign Office, known in very private circles as one of Her Majesty's most clandestine messengers. "Detective Parsons!" Ashcombe's voice echoed low and urgent as he emerged from the shadows, his figure wrapped in an overcoat. "I trust you understand the delicacy of our current predicament." "I do, Sir Reginald." "The diplomat, Vincent Merryweather," Ashcombe began, checking over his shoulder as though the very fog might be listening, "has woven a net so entangled with international implications that to pull any thread might unravel a peace we've desperately maintained." "Yes, his reach is far, and his influence deep," Jane confessed, her thoughts flickering back to the accumulated evidence hidden in her study. "But if we do not act, the consequences may be dire. The forged treaty is but a facade. Merryweather plans to use it to incite a conflict that could engulf Europe." Ashcombe's eyes held a gleam of respect. "You have seen through the smoke, but the real question remains, how do we proceed without turning an internal scandal into an international debacle?" Jane considered this silently. Her allegiance to justice was clear and uncompromising, yet she was no stranger to the complexities of statecraft, in which the greater good often wore a mask as deceptive as those at the embassy's masquerade ball. "It is perilous," she finally said. "We must expose Merryweather without exposing the plot. If the public comes to believe the treaty was a sham designed to provoke war, the trust in both our national and international institutions could crumble." "Exactly," Ashcombe nodded, pulling from his coat a bundle of papers. "These are communications intercepted from Merryweather's office. They are cryptic, but might hold the key to unravelling his scheme without a direct accusation." Jane received them, her fingers brushing against the cold, crisp paper. "I shall study these." "And I," Ashcombe added, shall be ready to mobilize the necessary forces on your word." Their meeting concluded with the silent acknowledgement of the road ahead, a path fraught with danger and moral uncertainty. Jane left the way she had come, her mind racing with the gravity of her task. Retreating into her study, Jane unfurled the intercepted messages under the dim light of her oil lamp. Each word was a potential cipher, each sentence a possible clue. The night waned as she pored over the documents, her eyes weary but resolute. Dawn had broken by the time she discerned a pattern. Merryweather's communications hinted at a meeting, a clandestine gathering of key conspirators. It was to take place under the guise of a charitable event at the Lyceum Theatre. If she could infiltrate this meeting, she might gather the evidence needed to dismantle the plot from within. Her plan was bold, possibly dangerous, yet it sparked within her a deep fire and the love for her country. She would attend the gathering, disguised not merely in garb, but in persona. The game, as a great detective of another era might have said, was afoot. As she prepared her disguise, Jane reflected on the tangled web she navigated. Each thread was spun with the utmost care. A misplaced word, a wrong step could lead to disaster. Yet, within her, the resolve to chase the shadowy truth never wavered. Heavy with the burden of impending confrontation, yet lightened by the clarity of purpose, Jane set out to face one of the most perilous nights of her career. Chapter 8. The Moral Dilemma. Jane sat quietly, the dim light of a solitary gas lamp casting long shadows across the piles of documents and maps strewn across her desk. A gentle but persistent ticking of the grandfather clock filled the room, as if counting down the moments to an inevitable crescendo in her investigation. Her mind was a whirlpool of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The facts of the case lay before her, stark and immutable, yet their implications wound intricately through the treacherous labyrinth of political intrigue and human frailty. The stolen Treaty of Westminster, with its hidden clause potent enough to ignite a war, was secured in her safe. The identity of the mastermind, the diplomat Sir Gregory Hammond, was no longer a mystery, thanks to a blend of keen observation and the unlikely assistance of her ostracized yet brilliant collaborator, the cryptographer Mr. Edgar Linton. To expose Sir Gregory and the treaty's true nature might well prevent a war, but at what cost? Peace hung precariously in the balance, its threads interwoven with deceit and the potential for greater conflict. The greater good, a concept both elusive and manipulative, taunted her from the pages of her notes. Sighing, Jane stood and walked to the window, wiping the glass with her sleeve to peer into the murky night. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman caught between duty and conscience. Could one truly act justly while cloaking actions in secrecy and deception? The clock ticked on. She turned as a knock came at the door. Mr. Linton entered, his face etched with concern. "Jane, I've been thinking," he began, hesitating as he sought the right words. "Are we doing the right thing?" His question pierced the core of her turmoil. "I have been pondering that very question, Mr. Linton," she admitted, gesturing for him to sit. They both knew the weight of what was at stake, not just the fate of a document, but the lives and futures of thousands, perhaps millions, turned upon the axis of their next actions. Justice, Jane mused aloud, is often portrayed as blind, but is it not instead a creature with 1,000 eyes, each viewing the world through a different lens? Linton nodded slowly. And yet, we must choose only one path. Yes, Jane agreed, her voice a whisper of doubt. One path, determined by our own vision, our own eyes. Can we trust our own sight to discern the right course? Perhaps it is not about trusting our vision alone, he suggested cautiously. Perhaps it is about understanding the visions of others, those who wrote the treaty, those who seek to exploit it, and those who will live with the consequences of our actions. I must think on this further. Our actions must be measured not just by the immediate outcomes, but by the ripples they create. We must consider the future we are shaping for those not yet born. Edgar Linton stood. I will leave you to your thoughts, Jane, but remember, whatever you decide, I stand with you. Left alone, Jane looked out her window, the fog a mirror to the tumult within her own mind. As Big Ben struck the hour, its chimes reverberating through the chill night air, she knew the morrow would bring her decision. Chapter 9. Confrontation at Windsor Castle. Windsor Castle loomed ahead, a silhouette carved into the fog of early evening like a great stone guardian of history, festering with tales of conquest and diplomacy. It was here, amidst these walls burdened with the patina of time, that Detective Jane Parsons found herself treading softly over the ancient cobblestones, her mind a tumultuous sea of thoughts and theories. Jane had been summoned by an urgent yet cryptic message from the diplomat himself, Sir Reginald Ashbourne. The text hinted at a final dialogue to discuss the matter of the missing Treaty of Westminster. She adjusted the collar of her long coat, her heart pacing with a blend of anticipation and dread. The grand entrance to the castle was lit by flickering torches. A servant, his face a mask of practiced neutrality, led her through echoing halls adorned with portraits of stern ancestors and tapestries that told of battles and kings. They arrived at a small, richly furnished study, where a fire crackled a warm welcome. There, Sir Reginald stood by the mantel, his posture rigid, the lines on his face etched deep by responsibility, or perhaps deception. Detective Parsons, your punctuality is as commendable as your reputation, Sir Reginald remarked, gesturing toward a chair with a polished hand. The room felt oppressively warm after the bite of the evening air. Time seems to be a luxury we can scarcely afford, Sir Reginald, Jane replied, maintaining a careful distance as she chose instead to remain standing. Indeed, he sighed, turning to face her fully now, his eyes a complex tapestry of resolve and something darker, perhaps fear. I trust you are aware of the stakes at hand. The stakes? Jane echoed sharply. Beyond the potential collapse of peace between our nations, or the possible outbreak of war, or perhaps you refer to the stakes of personal legacy, Sir Reginald. A shadow flickered across Sir Reginald's face, a brief fall of the mask he wore. The treaty's disappearance was no mere theft, she ventured, her voice steady. It was a calculated move to initiate chaos, to sculpt the political landscape to benefit certain interests, yours specifically. Sir Regal's silence spoke volumes, the crackling fire a soft chorus to their standoff. I'm not solely motivated by self-interest, he finally said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Consider the industrial magnates, their relentless expansion, the societal divisions deepening under the weight of progress. My actions, though drastic, are meant to preserve a greater balance. By risking war? Jane's tone was incredulous and sharp. Peace built on deception is as fragile as frost. Sir Reginald stepped closer, his expression earnest. Sometimes the end justifies the means. You, a detective, should understand the necessity of sacrifice. Sacrifice should not come at the expense of innocent lives. The people deserve the truth. They deserve to shape their destinies, free from manipulation. The tension in the air was palpable. Sir Reginald watched her, eyes narrowing slightly. And what will you do, Detective Parsons? He challenged. Expose everything? Tear down what little order remains? Jane stood resolute, her silhouette firm against the flickering shadows. I will do what I must, she declared. I will prevent this engineered conflict. I will protect the peace, not the facade of it, but its true spirit. For a moment, neither spoke, the only sound the crackle of the fire, a mediator to their confrontation. Then, with the air of a man facing his denouement, Sir Reginald nodded slowly. Very well, detective. Proceed as you see fit. But remember, the path of truth is often more treacherous than the road of deceit. As Jane turned to leave, she paused at the door. Truth, she mused aloud, has a clarity that cuts through the shadows. It's where I intend to stand, Sir Reginald, come what may." With those final words, Jane Parsons stepped out of the warmth of the castle. The game was set, the players known, and the end game within her grasp. The shadows of deceit would soon be illuminated by the light of truth, and she would be ready. Chapter 10. The Shadows of Deceit. The night felt as dark and sombre as the Windsor castle. Back in her study, Jane stood, a solitary figure against the weight of a decision that could steer the destiny of nations. Every word spoken in the breathtaking climax of the confrontation with the diplomat had settled like frost upon the pane of her thoughts. Silence now reigned, where once words had fenced and parried with the findsome artistry of expert duelists. The diplomat, Sir Reginald, once revered as a paragon of peace, had been unmasked. The evidence laid bare before him, the documents meticulously chronicled and corroborated, had drained the colour from his distinguished visage. "Miss Parsons," he had said, his voice a mixture of resignation and defiance. "You realise what this will lead to. The revelation, it won't just be my downfall, but it could ignite the very conflict we aim to avoid." Jane's response had been quiet yet firm. "Justice, Sir Reginald, often demands the bold embrace of truth, however perilous it may be." Now, as the echoes of their confrontation faded into memory, Jane found herself ensconced in the study of Windsor Castle. The secret clause of the Treaty of Westminster lay before her on the massive oak desk, its innocuous lines of ink hiding the potential for catastrophic war. The treaty, a document crafted to bind, could also rend asunder. The secret clause, a stipulation that would grant England unprecedented access to the natural resources of its neighbour under certain conditions of duress, was a tinderbox awaiting a spark. Sir Reginald had planned to use it to dismantle the industrial magnates who had, in his eyes, pilfered the prosperity of nations for personal gain. The cryptographer, Mr. Linton, had been the one to first crack the cipher hiding the clause. He had warned her of the precarious nature of knowledge. "Once known, it cannot be unknown, Miss Parsons, but once revealed, it may not be controlled." Jane pondered the truth of his words. Exposure of the clause could prevent Sir Reginald's manipulation, but at a cost of possible war. Concealment, however, left the clause a latent force, a spectre in the shadows, ready to haunt at a moment's chance discovery. It was then that she saw, lain carelessly to one side of the desk, a missive from the Queen herself. It was an unopened letter, sealed with the royal crest, addressed in elegant script to Jane. With hands that betrayed no tremor of her internal quake, she broke the seal. The letter was concise, its message clear and commanding. The Queen, having been apprised of the situation in broad strokes by her advisers, entrusted Jane with full discretion. The fate of the clause, and potentially of the peace, lay solely in her hands. The monarch's trust was a mantle, heavy yet honorific. Jane knew that history would not remember her name, yet the decision she made would resonate through the ages, invisible threads woven into the tapestry of time. With a steadiness born of resolve, Jane drafted 2 documents. One, ordering the destruction of any copies of the original treaty with the secret clause, ensuring that no trace of it would linger to light fires in future generations. The other, a confidential report to the Queen, detailing her actions and her reasons, to be sealed in the royal archives, accessible only to the sovereign. As dawn's first light breached the horizon, the documents were dispatched. In the quiet solitude of that morning, Jane felt the weight of her actions and the lightness of a burden released. The shadows of deceit, those woven of hidden motives and unsaid truths, would linger. But in her heart she carried the serene light of a peace hard won and a truth bravely guarded.